these distractions, it starts to feel even more like a show and a dog and circus, dog and pony circus, and less of being a sport. Unfortunately, it seems these past year in the NBA, there's already been more and more distractions.
It's definitely an interesting caveat to add another draft pick to the mix as far as along with the money compensation. Like I said, there's going to be some skepticism. There's going to be some indecision on this, especially a new tournament within the 82 game season. But I do appreciate Adam Silver being very progressive and looking forward thinking to see other options to make the league grow, and especially that time frame between Thanksgiving and Christmas is a lull in the grand scheme of the whole NBA season. So any ways to try to boost that is definitely going to be ideal, but it definitely will be a trial and error ebb and flow as they get it established if it does go through.
Sure thing, and those are all completely fair points. I guess before we move on to the next topic, also worth mentioning, in some of Mark's replies to his own tweet, actually, he did mention that there's been a bit of concern and pushback against the reseeding of the Final Four. So I don't want to spend any time on that here, but that is something to consider. That could be kind of a factor moving forward once that vote does come around in February and into April. But let's talk about now. We got our first trade. Woj, I'm sure, was very happy that we got our first trade following the Westbrook blockbuster trade that happened back in July, and it's not by any means a blockbuster trade. You're not seeing a big name player move, but I think it is kind of important trade and move for some of these teams. The Cavs and the Jazz, who have had some sort of experience in the past making deals with one another, they made another trade. They got the Cavs are receiving Dante Exum and 2 future second round draft picks. And the Jazz, and this is sort of the most important piece here, are receiving Jordan Clarkson from this trade. And why I say that this is very important for the Jazz, the Cavs are, they're kind of offloading at this point. Woj also kind of mentioned that they're trying to get rid of a lot of their veterans, and they're really starting to restructure around draft picks and their younger guys. But Jordan Clarkson going to the Jazz is a pretty important piece because the Jazz have, I think, struggled. I think most of us would agree they have not lived up to the potential that they showed both last season and with the addition of Conley coming in this season. That some people thought they could be the top 1, 2, 3 seed in the Western Conference, and they certainly have not lived up to that. Part of it has been that the defense is what that team relies on heavily, and the defense has not been there. But also now their offense has been struggling completely. Like Joe Ingles has been almost non-existent, it feels like. I have not heard his name once this season outside of sort of negative things. And Jordan Clarkson could be that huge boost off the bench to sort of fill that scoring gap that could give the Jazz at least a lift, that could kind of propel them back into closer to where people expected them to be at the beginning of the season. Clarkson's averaging just under 15 points with Cleveland, and he won't get as many touches with Utah per se, but coming off the bench will be a very important role for him because, if he does come off and he averages even close to 10 points, just under it, between 8 and 10 points, that could be a real strong lift for Utah to help them sort of set themselves up for, going into the second quarter and really helping those places where they've been struggling most. Do you guys think this is a smart move for the Jazz? And do you think that they might need to make another move to kind of get to where we expect them to be?
I think it's a smart move, but it's not going to be nearly enough. It makes a lot of sense for Cleveland because it's a bit of a salary dump. They get they're going to pay as much to Exum over 2 years as they would pay Clarkson for just 1 year, so it gets them a little bit more into the take mode they're in. But the problem with adding Clarkson for the Jazz, not that there's anything wrong with Clarkson, but depth tends not to be the most important when you get to the playoffs, because that's when, with the no back-to-backs, your key 6 to 7 guys, they're going to be getting most of the playing time, and that's their time to shine. And the problem with the Jazz this year is they're deeper than they are top heavy. They don't have that many big name players at the top, so adding another bench guy isn't going to help that much in the playoffs. So I think they are going to have to try to add another big name, and that's just not going to be easy to do when all the big names are already taken. So as of right now, I'd say Clarkson, and maybe you have to push the Jazz a little bit further in the playoffs, but in my mind, certainly still not finals contenders.
It's definitely a low tier move for both teams. I followed Jordan Clarkson since he was drafted by the Lakers a few years ago, and then obviously helping the Cavs get to that last final round left. So he definitely provides a nice scoring punch off the bench and will definitely help them throughout the regular season. But it is to see how, like you said, Jeff, when the rosters tighten up for the playoffs, if he's going to get much playing time once it comes to those first, second, third round teams. So as far as the Cavs, for Dante Exum, it's a very disappointing career so far. He's a top 10 pick, and he's just been struggling with injuries. So it'd be a nice change of scenery for him personally, play for a younger team and probably get some more minutes and get back into some rhythm in the NBA here. So it looks like it's a win-win. I know there's a couple draft picks exchanged, second-round picks, I believe, as well. So again, a smaller scale trade for both teams, but I think they both executed what they wanted here.
I think this is Clarkson's sort of chance to prove himself again. I think in Cleveland, he did recover after LeBron left and he got the ball in his hands a little bit more. I think that's what he was used to doing in LA. In his time there, because the LA teams were not particularly strong before LeBron went back there. So he was used to having the ball in his hands. He's used to being a primary scorer. And then when he went to Cleveland, he dropped off a little bit. He was useful in the regular season and sort of like a short stints. But in the playoffs, he was not. Him, Rodney Hood, Larry Nance was good. But between those two guys who were expected to be sort of strong bench scorers, they did not show up, in my opinion. Having watched those Cavs finals closely, I was very disappointed by his production later on in the season. And that was a bit disappointing to see. But I hope this is sort of an opportunity for redemption to him. You obviously mentioned, Taylor, that the way that he sort of performed in following him in his sort of upbringing in LA. And really, he made a good name for himself with the Lakers. He was a very good player with that team. And he just sort of dropped off. I don't think that was a product of him going to Cleveland and being on a bad team. I think that was a product of his play sort of dissipating from the way that we had expected him to be playing, from what the potential he showed in LA. And then, teaming up with a guy like LeBron who could set him up like that. That just felt like a very disappointing move, because he didn't really live up to the expectations I think that the Cavs had of him. But I hope that under a coach like Quinn Snyder, and with a bit more balanced scoring effort from Conley to Mitchell to if Ingles shows back up, like if he can sort of surround those guys and with Gobert in the middle, or if he comes off the bench like I mentioned and provides a spark off the bench, I think this could kind of shoot him back up to the place where a lot of people expected him to reach when he was moved from the Lakers to the Cavaliers. I don't know if you guys have any sort of response to that, or if you disagree. I know, Jeff, you're not as high on this trade as I am, but I don't know if you have any thoughts on that.
Well, it's not that I'm not really high in the trade. It's a good trade, but it's just not going to move the needle in that big of a way for either one of these teams. The Cavs are still in rebuilding mode. Kevin Love is the biggest question mark. He's the biggest name player they have to move, and the Jazz run from being a middle of the pack team in the bungled West to middle of the pack team in the bungled West with one more decent bench guy. This just isn't going to be a big enough move for either team to get them to where they're going. It's an important step in the right direction for both teams, but it's just an intermediary step, and much more needs to be done for the Cavs to get to the bottom, move back up, and for the Jazz to get them out. Mainline talent to get to the middle and get to the upper echelon of a now very competitive top of the Western Conference.
Yeah, not too much more to add. Like I said, Jordan Clarkson will be a nice rotational piece, especially like you said, Raj, of Joe Ingles having a struggling, disappointing season so far. And for the Cavs, mostly a salary cap dump to kind of get some younger player to try to catch and see if he can do well for them while they're rebuilding, and gets a couple draft picks as well. So, again, just lower tier trade. Both teams did what they needed to do, but we'll see where it goes from here.
Yeah, just a quick closing thought on this. The way I see this move, and again tying it back to my Cavs, is I see this move being a little bit like the J.R. Smith move to Cleveland, and he was a pretty essential piece in those finals. He had a little bit of a rocky sort of stint in New York, obviously getting suspended for like untying shoes and whatnot, being a little bit immature. But then he showed up back in Cleveland and did really put himself together and was crucial to those championship teams. And I think Clarkson has the potential to. He's not quite as talented of a player as J.R. Smith, I think, at least as a bench guy. But I think he has that same sort of vibe, being a primary scorer and providing, like I said, a spark off the bench. Now they obviously have to make a move for somebody like a Mozgov who could kind of anchor the bench in terms of defense and whatnot. Gobert is obviously there for the starting lineup, but I think there's still like one more piece that I think that if Utah makes the right move and is very smart with this trade deadline, which I think they're going to be, I think they're going to make at least one more move. They've got pieces that I think that they're willing to offload. I think this could be pretty smart move for Utah and hopefully set them up for like I've been saying, what we expected of them coming into this season. But let's now go ahead and get into our final topic of this week's episode, and that actually happened right after we recorded last week's episode last Saturday. The Wizards went in and played Philly in Philadelphia, the 76ers, and towards the end of the game, pretty late in the fourth quarter, there was a bit of a scuffle up between Isaiah Thomas and some of the fans. when he's shooting free throws, Isaiah Thomas, some of the fans started yelling. Again, we don't have confirmation on any of this, so this is kind of what the reports are saying, but they were yelling obscenities at him, some inappropriate stuff, and they claimed that it was so they could win a Frosty, because teams do these things, like they'll give away a Chick-fil-A sandwich or ice cream after a player misses 2 free throws late in the game, and they might have been trying to distract him, but he was not happy with the way that fans are treating him. He went into the stands, he confronted some of these fans. Luckily, there was no real physical altercation, similar to a little bit, obviously we got the Malice in the Palace, which was much larger scale, but then you had a fan confronting Denver a couple of years ago, and Russell Westbrook pushed this guy right after the game. But this is sort of a similar callback to some of those situations. Now Isaiah Thomas is out for 2 games. The fans who are said to have been yelling at Isaiah Thomas have been banned from Wells Fargo for a year. What are your guys' sort of thoughts on this particular situation, but also the general behavior between fans and players? Because, like I said, we've had a few instances of this happen in recent years.
In this particular situation, I respect, if you watch the video on ESPN's YouTube, I respect Isaiah Thomas's point of view. He confronted the fan in a calm and orderly manner. He was very thoughtful in the way he conducted himself after the game. Yes, he had to be suspended, but it could have been a lot worse, especially for players having a troubled NBA career. So I understand what Thomas did. I don't approve of it, but I respect his point of view and appreciate he was able to make a bad situation from being a lot worse. But I know for the fans, 1 year from what allegedly happened, not nearly long enough. Allegedly, these fans were giving middle fingers and yelling swear words. You can't, with the front row, so you can't expect to do that and keep your seat in the NBA arena. There are tens of thousands of fans in every NBA city who would die to see one game, and you have the money to see a front row seat, and you're going to waste that by getting right up in the player's face, making all this inappropriate gestures. You should not be allowed to return. There should not be tolerance for that. Now, in terms of the situation as a whole, this really hits home to me because I love seeing the games at my alma mater's high school. And my biggest disappointment, the playoffs are my least favorite time of the season because the fans get so rude and unruly, including, not naming names, but even the players' parents can get rather rude and unruly. And I just want to watch the game. Unfortunately, this situation is going to happen. There are going to be fans in every big sport, in every arena, every game. We're going to say a bunch of stupid stuff and swear and cuss and act disorderly. As a player, you have to be a professional and take it stoically. I know it's hard, but we're talking about guys who make tens or hundreds of millions, or maybe in the future, billions of dollars. With that money comes a serious responsibility, and you have to be able to withstand the criticism, even if it's not fair.
Yeah, I'm definitely not a fan of the entitlement of these fans that pay top dollar, think that they can just say and do whatever they want just because they're right in the center of the action. It's definitely a privilege, like you said, Jeff, just to even see a game, much less right on the action, right front row or right behind the basket like a lot of these fans are doing. So, like Roger, like you said, the Russell Westbrook incident, I think Kyle Lowry had something in the finals last year, and then I think this season as well. A lot of other players like this incident too with Isaiah Thomas, they're very stoic and handle it as professionally as they could. It's frustrating because these fans almost guarantee would not say these things to these players outside of an NBA arena, but the players are held to a higher standard and must take the high road, and if they take a suspension or fine, so be it. But I do applaud Isaiah Thomas for handling it in a very professional manner, albeit getting suspended for 2 games. But again, it's a really bad trend that I hope Adam Silver is going to continue managing and to punish these fans for doing so, like they banned a guy from Utah just as much as the players, because everyone needs to be held accountable if situations do arise.
The Utah situation obviously is important to mention here because that fan was supposedly yelling racist, very inappropriate things at Westbrook, and that's completely unacceptable. It's one thing to heckle if you're sitting courtside. Everybody sort of yells at guys. You have that sort of pretty infamous incident between Dwayne Wade and that Charlotte fan just a couple seasons ago, where you've got some memes of that guy like who's kind of dressed a little weird, and I think to some extent it is a little bit malicious, but to some extent it's a little bit fun as well if they're not being inappropriate. And it seems like this didn't get to that extent of inappropriateness, but if you are yelling inappropriate words like curse words at these players, that you should maintain yourself. What you guys are saying is very true. If you have the privilege to go see these games close up and are lucky enough to be right there next to the court that the players can hear what you're saying.